Previously in Uncommon, Book 1 in the Chronicles of the Common series, Vol, the Demon King of Atlana, had saved our group of heroes from the villainous cur, but to what end was still a mystery. And now, Chapter 13, Eva. My face was covered in blood. Again. I was shaking uncontrollably and starting to grow weak. A loud rasping noise grated against my fraying nerves, and I was horrified to realize that the offensive noise was coming from me. Awesome survival skills, Eva. Panic attack was not listed as one of the fight or flight options. The king appeared before my blurring eyes, and he held my face between his hands. Deep breaths, Eva. Yes, sir, I said, astounded I was able to squeeze the words between long, stuttering breaths. Vol. You may call me Vol. He pulled a cloth from his inner pocket and began to gently clean my face. Why? I asked. You're unique to the common. I find you intriguing, he said. I would like us to be friends. Friends address each other as equals. His reply confused me. I continued to draw deep breaths, in through my nose and exhale through my mouth. My mind began to clear and I realized my question had been vague. No, I meant, why did you kill them? I clarified. Ah. He gently wiped the last wet spot from my face and returned the cloth to his pocket. I killed them for 2 reasons. First, they allowed Kerr to enter without challenge. Second, they witnessed the viz of your arrival and knew your origins. Both are unacceptable. I wasn't in a position to question his management style, but neither seemed a credible reason for murder. In fact, I was beginning to seriously reconsider my place in this new world. I absently wondered if my old job in Los Angeles was still available. All I needed to do was find a portal to Earth. I managed to find one to Vatas whatever its name is. How hard could it really be to find one home? Izzy would be safe with her old friends, although I wasn't entirely sure Kai would survive the crazy clone. Vol tucked a lock of hair behind my ear and backed away. No harm will come to you, I promise. Are you okay? Izzy whispered. I nodded without much enthusiasm. Vol turned to the 2 men intensely watching our interaction. Luke looked like a giant angry Viking, fists clenched and jaw tight, ready to spring at the snap of a twig. Kai's face was red with anger, and I half expected cartoon steam to come billowing out of his ears. Vol, on the other hand, was the picture of tranquility as he calmly strolled through his gilded room, shoulders relaxed and not a single drop of blood to mar his perfectly pressed suit. In that moment, I completely believed the studies that stated most corporate leaders were psychopaths. Vol was a textbook example. I had hoped to have more time. However, I suspect Kerr is planning a quick return. I'll be brief. Vol stepped over the guards' bodies and stood before the beast and the prince. I still have no idea what their titles were all about, and I was dying to ask someone to explain the nicknames, but this didn't really seem to be the time. You have a choice, Vol continued. I can turn the 2 of you over to Kerr and seize control of Club Geminis. Or, I can overlook your trespass on my territory if you agree to 3 simple terms. Luke's jaw tightened farther, and I suspected he might have just cracked a few teeth. The nearly 7-foot-tall giant of a man drowning in dark brown hair issued a brief warning growl. Your terms. You are to take Eva and Isadora into your direct custody and keep them safe, Vol demanded. Do not place them in a camp. You've survived treacherous wars, numerous bounty hunters, and managed to stay hidden for 30 years. I believe you can manage to look after 2 simple Hada. Simple? There was absolutely nothing simple about Izzy, and I was quickly turning into complicated, more and more by the hour. I don't know why that blonde freak named Kerr had been staring at me, but I'm quite sure I made a powerful enemy today. Maybe I was still a little too human, but nothing about this whole experience seemed simple to me at all. Luke looked to me and then Isadora, his eyes filled with indecision. Finally, he gave a single nod to Vol. "Good," Vol smiled. "You will permit me communications access to Eva. Do not block my transmissions or messages. She'll need help to set up a SAT account. Send word directly to this contact when it's done." He extended a hand with a small chip in his palm. I didn't understand how my friendship would benefit the king. I was nobody, a former human, a stranger ignorant to the common. Ignorant? Does he think I'm ignorantly pliant? Was the king planning to use me? Vol was typical of those with power, manipulating and bartering the lives of others for their own gain. Irritation at being a pawn in their game consumed me. I was a tool for the king and a burden to the beast. Just great, my life is now getting less simple by the second. I watched as Luke once again ground his teeth in debate. "You're never to ask her location or for details regarding our activities," Luke demanded. "Acceptable," Vol quickly agreed, then took a step closer and lowered his voice menacingly. "Only as long as she remains healthy. If she is injured in any way, I will ask whatever I like, and you will not appreciate my retaliation on her behalf." What the hell? I was suddenly feeling very much like a prize-winning cattle or the slave I every bit looked the part. The king was bartering me like property but threatening to retaliate if I stubbed my toe? This whole situation was twisting my mind into knots. Luke nodded his acceptance and took the address chip from the king. My blood was moving from slow simmer to a full boil. I didn't like losing control of my own future, and this homicidal king was negotiating my life with a stranger. All right, so maybe Luke and Kai were old friends to Izzy, but they were still strangers to me. I obviously needed to be the one on guard, as Izzy didn't seem to be having any concerns about the matter. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet and barely contained excitement. "Your last request?" Luke asked. Vol grinned. "I would like an audience with Jotham and yourselves at a time of my choosing." An audience? All he wanted was to... what? Have a pleasant little chat? For what? This whole conversation was taxing my politically inept brain. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why he needed me for any of this. In that moment, Luke truly resembled the beast which Vol had named him. With nostrils flared and his chest heaving in anger, the man looked ready to leap for Vol's throat. His fierce teal eyes narrowed at the king. "We pick the location and conditions of the meeting," he growled. "Agreed." Vol glanced over his shoulder at me and smiled. "I don't know why you're smiling. You haven't even asked if I want to be your friend. What makes you think that you can use my life as coin to barter?" I asked. "Eva, we got what we wanted. Don't provoke the scary but sort of hot king who killed 3 people, Izzy whispered. Vol's smile lit his eyes in amusement. He stood in front of me and took my hand, then leaned in to whisper in my ear, "My dearest Eva, did it ever occur to you that they are the coin and you are the treasure?" The king pulled back to give me a heated stare. "Huh?" Now I was thoroughly confused. I hated political games. Vol used me like a pawn, then spoke to me like a queen. He appeared to attribute me some unknown value, but was giving me to the Hada. Although our original destination had been the Hada, why did it feel suspicious to be getting what we wanted? Regardless of my feelings, the deal was done. I would be required to play nice with the King of Atlana. Making friends with the bloodthirsty Demon King wasn't exactly on my agenda, but it never hurt to have someone powerful in my back pocket. Izzy seemed to trust the 2 strangers, but that didn't mean they were actually trustworthy. A crazy clone whispering to a bat did not project the ideal image of a credible recommendation. If things went south with the strangers, I was fairly certain Vol would come for his treasure, but I was equally sure he would expect more than friendship in return. Unfortunately, it seemed prudent to keep my options open. The large doors at the end of the room burst open, distracting me from my internal debate over selling my soul. I turned to watch a tall man with black hair and yellow eyes briskly stride into the room. He wore a suit similar to the king, but his build was more broad and sturdy than Val's. The man's quiet and intense aura screamed bodyguard. He silently stopped next to Val, who was still staring at me, waiting for my response to his offer of friendship. The guards at the end of the hall proceeded to close the large doors, but not before shouts and blaster fire could be heard ringing in the distance. It looked like the king had bigger problems to contend with, and my time for deciding had run out. The king's hazel eyes watched me patiently. Val didn't move a muscle. He didn't flinch at the sounds of battle encroaching on his doorstep. His breathing never changed. He didn't so much as fidget or shift his weight. It was thoroughly disturbing. A damned demon king had put the universe on hold while he waited for me. Well, shit. I'm totally going to regret this. With a firm nod, I shook his hand in compliance. Friends. Good. Val smiled broadly and turned to Luke. Now, Captain Zamuda has made the political error of attempting to retrieve the women by force. I believe it's time for you to kidnap my slaves and escape. Escape? Luke asked incredulously. You expect us to fight our way out of here and add another bounty to our heads? Without our weapons? Kai added. We'll never get through the gauntlet alive. What was the point of this whole negotiation if you're just sending us out to be slaughtered? What happened to you? You are such losers now. Izzy pushed past Kai, giving him a none too gentle shove, then hopped in front of the king and clapped her hands excitedly. So, what's the deal? Do we get a head start? Can we take you hostage? And where is the nearest armory? I've been dying to use a Naraki blast launcher. Val's lips made the slightest twitch before he turned to Luke with his expression of serenity back under control. As punishment to synergists for their transgressions, I will not issue a bounty for the theft of my slaves and your escape. I refuse to help them acquire either of the women. You will find your belongings in my adjoining chambers. My men have been deployed to suppress Kerr's invasion attempts, conveniently leaving a clear path to the shuttle bay on the port side of the station. The hall from my chambers leads directly there. And the armory? Izzy pestered. I groaned and pulled Izzy to my side. Shut it, Iz. The last thing we need is for you to get your hands on a demon rocket launcher. You'll likely blow us all to bits. While Luke and the king continued to bicker, the sounds of blaster fire grew ever closer. I'm not naive enough to think a demon king could be trusted, but neither did I look forward to being the object of some supernatural tug-of-war. Getting off this crazy space station sounded like a brilliant plan to me, even if it did mean fighting our way out. Time to get the hell out of Dodge. I walked to the hound, which was once again devouring the remains of more guards. I very nearly vomited at the moist rip of flesh from bone, but managed to swallow down the bile. I gave the animal one last scratch behind the ears. It's time for me to go. Be a good doggy for King Val, will you? My goodbye was unpleasantly rewarded with a bloody lick across my face. Ugh, why am I always covered in blood? I gave the animal a final pat on the head, wiped my face with my poor excuse for a skirt, and headed for the door to the king's chambers. Pausing at the door, I looked back to see everyone still bickering and shook my head. Hey, supernatural stud posse! I shouted and the room fell silent. I'm leaving now. Val, thanks for the hospitality and please take care of my hound. Izzy, are you ready to kidnap a pilot at gunpoint? Hells yeah, Izzy shouted, pumping a fist into the air. She tucked her little bat into the cleavage of her harem crop top and ran to join me. I'll speak with you soon, Eva, Val said with a genuine smile. I didn't wait to see if the guys would follow. It would be handy to have Luke at our side, seeing as the man did slaughter a whole squad of Synergist guards back in the forest. As entertaining as it might have been, I wasn't about to indulge the testosterone-fueled dick-measuring game he and the king seemed to be playing. If he and Kai wanted to come, they would need to move their brains back up to the head on their shoulders and get with the program. Izzy and I walked through the door to the king's private chambers, which was another gilded eyesore of epic proportions. We quickly found our packs and weapons on a long conference table in the middle of the room and pulled them onto our backs. I would have preferred to change into my own clothes, But wars didn't afford time for modesty. Luke barged through the door, his eyes blazing with fury. In 2 of his powerful strides, he was suddenly toe-to-toe with me, hovering menacingly. "Do not leave my side," he growled. Vol stood in the doorway with a careful eye on Luke. "Keep her alive, Commander Raval." "It's Captain now," Luke replied. "Is it?" Vol smiled suspiciously. "Stay safe, Eva." Vol vanished, leaving the rest of us to finish gearing up. Luke loaded up with weapons, never taking his eyes off me. "Same rules as the terminal. Kai will lead the way, I'll take the rear. The 2 of you stay low between us." I shrugged and turned to Kai. "Lead the way, Prince of the Undead." Kai's face dropped into a disgruntled frown. "Listen, Princess Ignorant. I'm not a soulless undead creature of the night. I'm a Raka vampyre. You would be wise to promptly abandon your human misconceptions. We don't have time for the 2 of you to flirt. Let's move," Luke growled. Izzy and I both turned to Luke with identical looks of disgust and issued a chorus of gagging. He quickly spun us around and shoved us in the direction of Kai, who was already leading the way through the door at the opposite end of the room. "I was not flirting," I whispered to Izzy, desperate for her to understand I wasn't trying to make a move on her former crush. "I know," she giggled and bumped me with a hip. "He's not your type. You like them taller and a bit more growly." I rolled my eyes and wisely kept silent. If she was implying what I thought she was, I didn't want to fall into that particular trap. I had a feeling that if Izzy got the slightest scent that I was attracted to the tall, hairy shifter, she would be all over that topic like a hellhound with a freshly barbecued guard. I snorted. Only a few days into my galactic adventure and I was already creating similes like a native. "Yay me!" We rounded the short passage and turned down the longest frickin' hall I had ever seen in my life. The wide hallway was black with red glossy stone floors, and door after door lining the way. It was a horror movie nightmare, where the room keeps stretching for days while the helpless victim runs and stumbles but never manages to get anywhere. "Please tell me this hall is magically spelled like the terminal," I groaned to Izzy. "Unfortunately, no. It's really as long as it looks," she groaned back. Blaster fire echoed to our rear. Behind which of the hundreds of doors the war was waged was anyone's guess. Luke and Kai exchanged one of those silent conversations that irritated the crap out of me. With some secret decision made, they turned us toward the hall, and Kai did what I was really hoping he wouldn't do. He broke out into a run. "It's most definitely time to commit to that gym membership, Eva." After a dozen doors, which was the only way to measure distance in this nightmare, I was already breathing hard. Sweat broke out across my brow and down my spine, and I was half-heartedly grateful I was now wearing a barely-there harem getup. The breeze across my legs as we ran helped soothe my sudden aching muscles, though I have to admit the thong wedged up my ass was a bit distracting, and a sports bra would not have been unwelcome. We ran for what felt like eons. My calves were cramping, my top was drenched in sweat, and the pack on my back was getting heavier by the minute. The shouts and blaster fire of Vol's battle was a distant whisper, almost missed beneath the thudding echo of our boots beating a fast escape. I was just about to ask for a much-needed break when I suddenly came to an abrupt halt. My nose crushed against a broad chest. I glimpsed a blur of red uniform before ricocheting off the wall of flesh to sprawl across the floor. Dazed from my head-on demon collision, I lay on the floor with the pack at my back, like a flipped turtle too stunned to make the useless attempt to right myself. As it turned out, lying low was both a good thing and a bad thing. On the positive side, my head was well below the line of fire exchanged between Luke and the new squad of Vol's guards, which spontaneously burst through one of the hundreds of doors lining the endless hall. Deafening blaster fire exploded in the hall, accompanied by shouts and grunts of a struggle. The bad news? I was lounging in the middle of the action, or rather beneath the results of the action. Within a handful of tense seconds, where I basically tried to curl into a tiny ball and covered my head in fear, a massive weight fell on top of me. As I gulped in a breath of stale air that smelled of ozone and copper, Another weight landed across my legs. When the firing ceased and only a song of heavy breathing remained, I peeled my hands from my face to find myself buried beneath not one, but 2 demon guards, who weren't in any position to kindly bleed somewhere else. Izzy crouched by my side with an evil grin. "I know it's been a while," she whispered, "but if you want to experiment, I would recommend choosing live partners for your next threesome." "Shut up," I said between clenched teeth. "Get them off me." Luke hurled the dead demons down the hall, then snatched my hand and dragged me to my feet. My chest and legs were slick with demon blood and bits of gore that I really didn't want to investigate too closely. The rest of our little group was miraculously clean and unharmed. Izzy curled her lip in disgust as she pulled a piece of something fleshy off my thigh. "Lucian, was it really necessary to gut that demon? Eva looks like a virgin sacrifice." The man in question was turned away from us, watching down the hall as if he expected another wave of intruders. His constant growling was only interrupted by periodic snarls. All I could see was his broad back and long tangled hair, but I had the feeling the man was quickly losing control of whatever had dubbed him the Beast. "Brother, we need to go," Kai quietly stated. For a full, agonizing minute, none of us moved. We waited for Luke to turn around, do something, say anything. He didn't. He just stood there growling like a predator waiting for prey. We were sitting ducks in the middle of this damned hall. I was covered in blood, my entire body ached, and I just wanted to pass out. It was undeniably temporary insanity that inspired my next move. I clutched Luke's hand and squeezed. "Luke, can we please leave now?" He slowly turned to look at our joined hands. His gaze of glowing teal eyes followed up my arm to meet my frightened stare. My breath caught at the sight of his slightly misshapen mouth and 2 frickin' massive black saber-toothed fangs. His lower lip was split beneath each fang, dripping blood down his chin to paint his beard with macabre red highlights. "Yep, he is definitely a shifter." My heart raced and my palms were slick with sweat, but I shoved down the urge to flee for my life. I squeezed his hand again, hoping the man inside was still there enough to understand I didn't mean him any harm. Between one blink and the next, his glowing teal eyes transformed from unbridled rage to absolute awareness. The world tilted, and the next thing I knew, I was flung upside down over Luke's shoulder, and we were once again running. The bag bounced against my back, driving my stomach into the mountain of a man's very hard shoulder. From this height, I should have had a good view of the hall for miles, but all I could see was hair and a glimpse of Luke's heels as he ran. I didn't even get to stare at his ass that was hidden beneath a long leather coat. "Put me down," I said, smacking his back. "I'm entirely capable of running on my own." "No," Luke said with a deep growl, his voice sounding far more animal than man at the moment. "Too slow." The independent feminist in me absolutely hated to admit he was right, but this was less about my sex and more about my height and species. His long legs were eating up the hall far quicker than I ever could. I absently wondered if Izzy were also propped on Kai's shoulder, then realized that she would probably stab him if given the opportunity of that position. I bounced on Luke's shoulder for what felt like eons. My stomach was aching to vomit and the blood was rushing to my head. It was absolutely demoralizing to have Luke lug me around like a sack of useless potatoes. To say that I was getting tired of this position was an extreme understatement. "He's coming, with demon company," Luke shouted. "Who's coming?" I cried, straining to do upside-down crunches in order to get a look down the hall. "Let's stop and fight," Kai shouted back. "Run," Luke ordered with another growl. Luke tugged at the bag on my back, relieving some of the weight. Pushing my arms against Luke's back, I managed to lift up and crane my neck enough to see down the hall behind us. It was difficult to tell, but it looked like something was moving in the distance. The soft hum of wind began to grow like an approaching storm. A shapeless blur of black and gray sped past door after door at a rapid rate. The swarm of colorless cloud hovered above the floor, rocketing through the hall unimpeded. Whatever that thing was, it was gaining on us, fast. Could someone with non-human eyes tell me what the hell is following us? I asked. I smell cur and demons, Luke replied with another growl. Yeah, that cloud speeding after us does not look like the scary blonde guy, I answered. That's the demons, Luke replied. He slid to a stop and briefly turned to investigate our pursuers. With my new view in the direction we were heading, I could see Kai and Izzy had stopped a dozen feet in front of us, and were thankfully at the end of the never-ending hall. The pair was frantically pushing buttons on a panel next to a large glass door. Through the glass door appeared to be a wide-open hangar bay filled with strange ships. "Why didn't they carry you?" I asked Izzy. She shot me a quick grin. "My new clone body is super fast. Cool, right?" "Yeah," I grumbled. "I don't know how he's doing that, but it's Kerr." A growl rolled through Luke's chest. He slipped the blaster from my hip and passed it to me. "Shoot him." Luke turned back to our companions and ran the rest of the way down the hall. In full agreement with Luke's order, I shot. The cloud that was supposedly Kerr bounced off the walls and swerved erratically, expertly avoiding my shots. Frustrated, I sprayed the black walls with shot after shot, and not once did the cloud give me any indication that I actually hit the damned thing. The hum of wind grew with every heartbeat as the Kerr cloud grew closer and closer. My ears strained to pop, aching with the torrent of air moving through the hall like the wake of a screaming jet engine. I ignored the pain and continued to fire at the speeding cloud, but my every shot appeared as though it just went right through him. A whoosh of air announced the door opening behind me, and relief flooded my veins. Suddenly the cloud vanished. My ears finally popped, and the silence of the hall felt like a vacuum. Then Kerr's maniacal grin appeared inches from my face. His mouth was covered in black blood and bits of, well, I didn't particularly want to know what, or who, was staining his teeth. I gagged from the noxious smell of copper and sulfur billowing off him, and made a futile attempt to crawl back over Luke's shoulder. The hall spun again, and I was once again rewarded with a view of Izzy and Kai standing in the open door. Kai vibrated with anger. His fists clenched, but his feet were rooted in place. Izzy ducked left and right, her blaster raised as she tried to get a clear shot around Luke's massive body, which was twisting and bouncing me all over as he fought with Kerr. "Put me down, Luke!" I shouted, trying not to vomit from the wild ride on his shoulder. "Excellent idea," Kerr purred. Luke took one step back toward the open door. Then the universe was suspended in slow motion. Hands wrapped around my ankles. Luke grunted and seemed to fold in two as he slid from beneath me, propelled backwards through the open door. I hung mid-air for what felt like agonizing years. Then a tug on my ankles finally decided the direction of my fall, back into the hall. My body rushed to the quickly approaching floor when strong fingers gripped my wrists. A scream tore from my throat as I bounced in the air. Suspended above the floor and held aloft by Kerr's pull on my feet and Luke's tug on my wrists with the heavy bag bowing my back. My shoulders and knees strained against the pressure of the very literal tug-of-war in which I now found myself. Tears streamed down my face, flowing unbidden from the agonizing pain of nearly popping joints. If we didn't do something soon, these men were going to tear me in two. Unfortunately, there was only one solution, because there was no way in hell I was going with the bloody-faced creep named Kerr. I met Luke's eyes. "Pull!" Luke paused, his expression informing me this was going to hurt. He must have seen my intent because he slowly nodded, and then he pulled. The sound of my screams mixed with Kerr's laughter into a twisted and terrifying chorus echoing through the hall. Kerr briefly released his grip on my ankle, but to my horror his hand found new purchase in my calf. His claws dug into my flesh, then he followed the same process with his other hand, climbing my body like a cat up a tree. "This one is coming with me," Kerr purred. "Not happening, asshole," I shouted over my shoulder. "Release her, beast," Kerr snarled, "or I will shred her in half." Luke's only response was to increase his pull on my arms. Kerr slammed his claws into my thigh and pulled, ripping open my leg. I screamed and kicked wildly, barely making any contact at all. He continued to climb up my body, using his claws for anchors into my flesh and leaving behind a series of torn and bleeding holes. I screamed and bucked, trying my best to dislodge the man, but nothing seemed to work. Every move I made merely drove his claws deeper into my skin. He briefly lifted his left hand and then drove his claws into my hip. I don't know what happened or why it happened, but an electrical current shot from the point on my hip, rushing over my skin and funneling into Kerr's hand. "Rack!" Kerr screamed, pulling his claw out of my leg. Luke grunted, and for a brief moment his grip on my wrists loosened. I looked up to see him grit his teeth, his face twisting in pain. "Release me!" Kai shouted. "No," Luke grunted in reply, renewing his grip on my wrists and tugging harder. "Isadora, shoot Kerr." "I don't want to hit Eva," Izzy whined. "It wouldn't be the first time," I snarled. "Do it!" She shot. I ducked just as her blast passed over my head. Kerr twisted out of the way. His grip loosening on my hips was all Luke needed to wrench me from the man's grasp. Finally free from resistance, Luke and I flew backward and through the open door. I landed on his chest and collapsed. Kai dove for the door controls, quickly closing the barrier between us and Kerr. "There is nowhere to hide." Kerr's slimy voice boomed through the speaker next to the door. Kai shot the control panel and speaker, silencing the crazy man who could turn into frickin' clouds. Clouds! Blaster shots slammed into the opposite side of the locked door. "Blaster-proof, moron," Izzy sang, taunting Kerr, who by the sounds of his shouts and shots was working himself into a full-blown temper tantrum. Luke gently brushed the hair from my face. "Are you all right?" While my mountain of flesh bed was rather comfortable, I was fairly certain I was definitely not all right. It was probably rude to linger on top of the man, but my legs felt like I had just walked through a meat grinder. Everything below my waist was screaming with pain, and I could hardly catch my breath. I struggled to prop myself up, then froze, staring into unexpected familiar teal eyes. The White Room flashed through my mind, and I realized I had been in this position before, pulled through glass, lying on top of a man with stunning teal eyes. Lying on top of this man? I couldn't form the words. How on earth did you ask a guy if he was the same man from your dream? My new universe was crazy, but it couldn't be that crazy. Could it? Subscribe to continue listening and discover if our heroes are able to survive Kerr's wrath and escape Atlana. If you liked what you heard, the Uncommon ebook can be purchased at all major retailers for only 99 cents. Thank you for listening.